And the first thing I need for you to do is go ahead and give your name and your title.
Sure. Bob Kahn, General Manager, Austin Energy.
Well, first of all, sir, you were most recently GM of the Texas Municipal Power Agency. How do you think that role prepared you to lead Austin Energy?
So I don't think it's just, I'll call it Team PA. I don't think it's just Team PA. I was at Team PA, I was at ERCOT, I've worked at the Public Utility Commission, I was a partner in a law firm. I was a JAG, which maybe helped me make decision makings better. But I think it's just my experience in the industry in general. It doesn't make things easy, but I think it makes things a little easier just because I've seen just about everything, I think, in my career. I'm used to dealing with situations that pop up, and my job is to solve problems. That is a big part of my job, and I think that's one of the reasons I'm here, to try and fix things.
Now, you say you're here to fix things. You've had a little time to settle into your new role, and what changes do you see possibly making to keep Austin Energy viable for all its customers?
Yeah, so at a high level, I think my main goals are, we need to run Austin Energy like a business. We need to be nimble. We need to be able to respond quickly. The PUC, the ERCOT, the LEDGE, you always see new stuff coming down the pike. We need to be prepared to respond to those things, and we have a good team here that can do that. We're over at the LEDGE all the time, at the PUC, ERCOT, we have teams all over the place. We need to maintain our financial strength and integrity. I'm sure you might ask me about the 2% base rate increase soon, but that's important. Also, we need to have the right people. 2 years ago, whoever used the word supply chain, right? Nobody ever used that word prior to the pandemic. But that's a big challenge. We're going to have a commodity manager that we're hiring, because instead of just sourcing in the United States for transformers or wood poles or cable, we're having to look all over the world. And so that's a challenge. And those are the main things. Reliability, resilience is important. MARA, resilience is a focus, not just on the system, but cybersecurity, physical security. You've probably read about substations that have been shot at. We just have to watch out for all that.
2% base rate.
So we're asking for a 2% base rate increase. And as you may or may not know, but base rates are about half of the electric bill that customers get for residential. And so it's about a 1% base rate increase. And I'm not trying to minimize the impact. It's about $1 a month. But the reason we're doing that is most utilities our size have between 200 and 250 days reserved cash. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. Our goal is to have a minimum of 150. Right now we have 93 days. So we need to improve that. And that's tens of millions of dollars that we need to get. And the reason, why do we need that? So when you are working in the ERCOT market, you have to collateralize anything you're going to use to buy out of the ERCOT market. They want to make sure that you have the money to pay for it. So the more you buy, the more cash you have to have. And so we need to make sure we have enough cash on hand to make sure we can get the power that we need to serve Austin Energy. Because I think you know that we generate electricity, we sell it to the ERCOT grid, and then we buy it back. That's how the market works.
So we're trying to increase the coffers of Austin Energy,
yes,
so to speak.
Yes.
So we're doing the 2% base rate increase now. Will we see another base rate increase, say, next year, the year after that, the year after that?
I will have to look at that and see what we're going to do next year.
Okay. And you did bring up security. Let's delve
yes.
into that a little bit, since, as you said, substations across the U.S., some of them have been
right.
targeted. What
yes.
are we doing here to sort of be secure, to keep what we have secure?
Yeah, it's always difficult. We have 86 substations all over town, and you have to take into account the neighborhood. You don't want to do things that are going to upset the residents that live near them. But we have, I don't want to get into any details because it gets into what's called critical infrastructure, but we're doing things to protect as best we can our substations and our other infrastructure.
Physically?
Both. Physically, cameras, everything. You'd be surprised.
All right. Let's turn to the disastrous winter storm. that we had a couple of years ago. I know that is something people have probably asked you about ad nauseum. It left thousands of people in Austin without power, including myself, for quite a while. What do you think could have been done differently?
So let me start out, you're talking about Mara, right, the ice storm?
Yes.
Okay, so let me start out by talking about Uri for a second, which was much different than the ice storm. You know, Uri, cold weather, snow, no ice really on trees, and so that was what I'd call a load shed event, where ERCOT said, power plants are dropping off, load is going up because people are turning on their heat. We've got to do something to balance the grid or it's going to shut down. And so they ordered what's called a load shed event. Austin Energy was ordered to shed between 700 and 800 megawatts, which is a lot when your peak is a little over 2,000 or close to 3,000. So we did that. There are about 35,000 people without power as a result of Uri. Okay, we had about 170,000 people without power as a result of the ice storm. Now, I say 35,000 people without power as a result of Uri, but of course we had to do what's called rotating blackouts. And the challenge there is you have critical customers, hospitals, police, fire, nursing homes, that you don't want to rotate. You got to keep those lights on. And the problem we ran into a lot of other utilities is we couldn't rotate as much as we'd like because otherwise you'd have to turn off the people you really need to keep on. So instead of rotating every 45 minutes, we were probably taking longer. I was like you, I was without power for 3.5 days. And so we are looking at improving our circuits that we can work with and rotate. So for example, we have a hospital at the beginning of a circuit, but then the circuit continues for another few miles, serving hundreds of customers or thousands of customers. So we've found a way where we can isolate the hospital, serve them, and then beyond the hospital on that circuit, we can isolate it and rotate it. And so that's a big deal. So we're finding ways to do that. It's expensive, but we're doing that. So instead of being without power for 3 days, maybe it's 45 minutes or a few hours. So that's Uri. Ice storm, you know, the forecast was about 1/4 inch of ice. And it came in at 7/10 or almost an inch of ice on the trees. You all drove around town. You saw all the trees down. It was what I call a catastrophic hurricane type event. And we did not expect that. The forecast was something much different. We're used to events where it's a day or two. This was over a week. I think people were without power for up to 10 or 11 days. And the thing that we could have done better was our assessment. We do what's called tabletop exercises, where we prepare for events for a day or two, but we had not done something like this. Is that?
It's a security alarm, I think.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought that was me or something,
No.
so I'm sorry. Yeah, security.
Okay, that's
Yes.
a good thing.
Sorry about that, I just got distracted. So our assessment could have been done much better. We weren't prepared for doing this type of assessment for this type of event. In the after action report that we're going to do, we're going to have close to 80 recommendations going forward, all the way from mutual aid response to communications, to assessments, to our software, to when you go online and look at the outage map, which got overwhelmed when many customers were trying to get to it. That's something else we're going to look at. But I'll go back to the assessment. So we did an assessment. It wasn't what it should have been. And then based on that, we came up with a communication to the public as to what we thought the next steps would be. And we thought that people would recover in a day or two. Well, we created expectations for customers that were not met. And we have got to do better. That was, to me, the assessment and the communications were the big failure on our part. We just can't let that happen. Next time, perhaps, and this will be in the recommendations, you know, I'm not afraid, if I don't know the answer, to say, I don't know when power is going to come on. But you know what? We're in phase 1. We're doing an assessment. Give us a day or two. If there's a catastrophic event like that, right, give us a day or two to do an assessment, and we'll get back with you and let you know when we think we can get power back on. But to create expectations for people, including me, because I'm an Austin resident, that was not good.
So, I mean, you were without power.
Yes. Yes. I was without power for a little while.
Okay. Now that brings me to the vegetation management issue. You say that the ice was coating the trees. I know the tree limbs were falling. They were falling on the
Yes.
lines.
Yes.
That was a huge impact and caused quite a few problems.
Yes.
Has Austin Energy looked deeper or revamped its tree trimming issues?
Yeah. So let me say this first. I think the vegetative management did impact some of the outages, but I don't think it was as big a deal as people think. When trees are falling over and limbs are sinking 10 or 15 or 20 feet, no matter how much you cut back, a lot of times it's not going to matter. It did have an impact on outages, but not as much, I think, as people think. But here's what we're doing. So let me go back a little in history. So we used to cut 10 feet for slow-growing, 15 feet for fast-growing trees, and then we heard from the neighbors many years ago complaining that we were trimming, they didn't like how much we trimmed. And so we responded to that. Using hindsight, maybe we should have pushed back more, but we didn't. And so for many years, we were at 4 and 8 feet. And then we went back to the industry standard, which is 10 and 15 feet, which I just explained to you. So a few years ago, we went back to 10 to 15 feet. And now we're playing catch up. I think in a few years, we'll be there. We are having difficulty finding contractors that can do all the work that has to be done. We have 3 large contractors. You've probably seen Davy and Asplund around town that do that kind of stuff. They just cannot find enough contractors to keep up with what we want. So we started hiring smaller contractors that aren't stealing from the bigger contractors that we want to get the work done. So we're making good progress. We're getting there. I would just say that if customers see there are trees that need to be trimmed, trees that they think are going to be a problem, trees that are touching lines, call us and we will come out and take a look at them.
Okay, to backtrack a little bit, you said that, of course, the tree limbs were a problem, but they weren't like the biggest problem.
Right.
What was the biggest problem?
Well, the biggest problem were trees falling over, limbs. You know, I had trees in my front yard that I had to put ladders under the trees to hold them up. I had to put ladders, 2x4s. There were 2x4s all over my neighborhood where people were propping up branches that were sagging 20 feet. And so that was the biggest problem. With the 7/10 of an ice, so I think I read somewhere it can add a ton of weight to a tree when you have 7/10 of an ice encapsulating a tree. So it has a lot of weight. That's why trees were falling over. You saw it took months for them to come through and collect all the vegetation that fell over.
Now, Austin Energy has about 2,400 miles of lines that run throughout our area. Do we? Do we?
Actually, we have a lot more than that.
Oh, really? How many?
Yeah, so we have 7,000 miles that are buried of distribution lines and about 5,000 miles that are above ground.
Have we thought about burying more of the lines?
So that's something that I think, as you know, that City Council has asked us to look at, and we are looking at it. We issued a request for proposals, and we have something coming in, I think, in about 6 months or so that will present options to us. And of course, we're looking at it meanwhile, trying to figure out what we want to do. Burying is not the only answer. There's other things you can do for resilience purposes. We can harden lines above ground. There's things you can do to encapsulate them with something so that if something falls on them, it's less likely that they'll get knocked down. So there are ways to harden lines without burying them, because there's challenges to burying lines also.
What are some of those challenges?
Well, you go in a neighborhood and go into somebody's backyard and say, we're going to dig up your backyard so we can bury a line. And you have challenges because you have drop lines to houses. So how's that going to work if you have a pole up here and a drop line down there and then you bury it? It's going to, it just changes the infrastructure totally, how that's going to work.
And of course, there's the financial issue.
Yes, it would be very expensive. We looked at this when I was here before, 15, 20 years ago, and it was going to, if you buried everything, which I'm not saying we will ever do that, but if you did, we looked at that, it was going to cost more than utilities worth. When you build, just for example, when you build a transmission line, and I'm talking transmission, I don't know about distribution because the geography is a lot different houses, but yeah, transmission line, to just build a line above ground is over $1 million a mile. Yeah, so it's expensive when you're dealing with transmission or distribution lines. But I think it's a lot more challenging because of the infrastructure that's around distribution lines, all the houses and trees. Transmission line is 110 feet up, right? So it's not as challenging.
All right. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the heat problems that are plaguing all of us, including Austin Energy. We know the heat's caused a number of outages, but exactly how does the heat cause equipment to fail?
So let me answer you made a comment, number of outages. Actually, the ERCOT grid is doing really well. If you go to ERCOT.com today, you'll see there's probably 10,000 megawatts of reserve capacity. So I'm not really worried about outages. Right now we're on the weather watch, which means normal conditions exist. I think it's always good for people to crank up the air a little, crank it up a couple of degrees so it's hotter in the house to use less energy. That's always a good thing. But I think right now the grid's in pretty good shape. But it's not just the heat, but you have Mara, cold, this heat. It's tough on the equipment. It makes it difficult on the equipment.
Because I actually had an outage a few days ago.
Yes.
A transformer blew.
Right.
And one of the crew people out there I was speaking with said it's heat related.
Yes.
So I was like, how does the heat affect all of this equipment?
Yeah. But it's like anything else, contract, expand, hot, cold, it just wears down the equipment.
So there's really no way to protect it all from that.
Well, we look at that kind of stuff. I'd probably have to get back to you on the details on our operations people and what they do technically to protect the equipment.
Is there a shortage of Austin Energy crews to work on all of these different issues?
We have been trying to hire more crews out there, I'll say contractors, and we have difficulty finding them, just like we find difficulty finding contractors for vegetative management. It's just hard to find people nowadays to do work. So it's a challenge.
So it sort of sets back.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I said out of vegetative management, we'd like to be further along, but we're just having trouble finding enough contractors to cut all the trees, trim all the trees. Yeah.
Is there anything else you think people need to know about or they need to understand when it comes to Austin Energy?
I'll just go back to what I said before. We just need to make sure we run this place like a business, respond to customers' needs, desires. We need to make sure we're reliable. I mean, I know people focus on reliability. It's very important. We have what I call one-offs, Mara. That was not a good situation. But when you compare us to other utilities, our reliability is much better than other utilities. In general, when you look at, there are measurements you can use. If you read our annual report, you'll see that compared to a lot of other utilities around here, our reliability is much better than theirs. You look at duration or frequency of outages, it's much better. But we, of course, did not perform well during Mara, but people still were going to be without power for over a week. It's just that we created expectations that were not met. But overall, we need to work like a business, maintain reliability, get the good people we need, maintain our financial strength, and be nimble and flexible out there.
And of course, work on regaining the trust of the community.
Yes.
Because quite a few people
Yes.
have, I guess you'd have to call it PTSD.
Yes. Well,
How will Austin Energy regain the trust?
So we have an after-action report coming out at the end of the month, and I think we have about 80 recommendations on things we need to do to do better, and we're going to be a lot more transparent and a lot more accurate in what we tell people.